Hello again, Year 10. Lovely to have you back after Easter. Hope you're rested. Hope you've got your books, a pen and a pencil, because that's what you're going to need for this lesson. I would suggest that you download the video so that it's easier to pause it. If you're short of paper, you could actually print it off, as it's basically a PowerPoint. Then you can write on the slides. You will have a question that you do need to email to me at your answer to me at the end though. Now you're doing now is on this first slide here. It's got three parts. First of all, the word equation for photosynthesis, which you should already know. Secondly, the chemical formulas, and thirdly, balancing it. Remember, you can pause the video while you do this. You don't have to write quickly. And here are your answers. The reactants are the things that you start with, the things that take part in the reaction. Carbon dioxide, a gas that is taken in through the stomata of the leaf, on the underside of the leaves. You have got water that is taken up through the roots. Sunlight is a catalyst, it's not a reactant, it's there to help the reaction get going. But the fact that it is needed does remind us that photosynthesis only occurs in the daytime, not at night time. The products are glucose, a simple sugar, and oxygen. Oxygen is another gas. It is exchanged outwards through the stomata in a similar way to humans exchange carbon dioxide and oxygen in their lungs. The difference is that plants want the carbon dioxide and they don't want the oxygen. We want the oxygen and not the carbon dioxide. The glucose is dissolved in water and it travels around the plant where it's needed. We've got 4 objectives today. If you've done well on the starter, you'll have already covered the first one. If you've had to copy bits, that's fine, but you need to learn it. You need to know it. Everyone needs to know the word equation. You should already know the formulae for the compounds involved. And if you can balance it, you'll be pushing yourselves up towards A level 6. We're also going to be learning what resources plants will compete for, how plants compete for them, and we're going to practice a longer question, which you're going to email your answer to me at the end of this tutorial. You've got a picture here. This is what I call a see what you say. Now you can talk to yourself or you can pause the video and write it in your books. I'm looking for 3 things. Now hopefully what you will have noticed, not necessarily in this order, the order isn't important, is you have got small blue flowering plants on the ground. If you don't know the name of those, I'm going to tell you now, it's bluebells, not hard to remember. They are currently in flower. If you've gone for a walk for your daily exercise, you may well have seen some under trees. So the second thing you've got here is trees which are just starting to come into leaf. Currently happening around us. The leaves are very light green and they're much smaller than they will be later in the year, so lots of light will pass through them onto the bluebells. Don't need to know the species of tree, I'm not asking you to do that. The other thing you can see is you have got a piece of dead tree trunk on the right hand side of the picture. That is a tree that has died, it has fallen down and now it is decomposing or rotting, and as that happens, the minerals contained in it, the carbon contained in it, hydrogen and oxygen are all being recycled back into the soil, back into the atmosphere for plants to use as they grow. So if we go back to the equation for photosynthesis, we know that plants need water and carbon dioxide. We know that they need light as a catalyst, and earlier in this year we learned that plants need mineral ions to help them grow and to help reactions. They also need space to grow. If you've got a plant growing in a pot at home, if it gets too big for the pot, one of 2 things will happen. Either, if you're lucky, it will just stop growing. If you're less lucky, it may well die. And the fact that these things are all needed by plants can cause them to compete. It's not like a race, not like sports day, but they all want the same things, a bit like perhaps having a meal with a big family and everybody wants to get the most sausages or pizza on their plate. Right, large plants fairly obviously need large amounts of water. They need large amounts of minerals from the soil. In our picture, the large plants are obviously the trees, and it's very easy to see that they are much taller than the smaller ones, and because of that they will reach higher up. They will reach the sunlight more easily, and as the leaves get big and they make what is called a canopy, they will block a lot of the sunlight from the plants that are below them. If you've ever been to a woodland in the summer, you will know that as you walk in, it is shadier. It feels cooler because a lot of the sunlight is being prevented from passing all the way through to the floor of the wood where you are walking. And that is a lovely thing if it's a hot day and you want to get out of the sun. However, if you are a plant growing on the floor of the wood, it is not such a good thing because you may not be getting all this light that you need to grow. And for that reason, plants such as bluebells will deliberately grow earlier in the season. So bluebells have their leaves come up when it is before the trees have got their leaves. They are in flower already, and they will die back very shortly in the next 2 to 3 weeks, and then you actually won't find much sign of them. They will become dormant. They will have stored energy that they made from photosynthesis in bulbs under the ground, and they will stay there but hidden until next spring when there is enough warmth for them to grow, and they grow ahead of the trees. So that is one way that they can deal with competition. The smaller plants may well grow and flower earlier than the large ones. Now, we've already talked about minerals in the soil. This is something you can't see just by looking at the picture. So it has to be a diagram. It's not easy to take photographs underground. You have two main types of roots. On the left, plant A is something similar to a grass, and they have long, thin roots, a bit like hairs. And they're long and thin, they reach a long way. Each one goes in a slightly different place, so it's got an opportunity to go to a different part of the soil, find water, find minerals and absorb those. Remember, we have the special cells, the root hair cells, and those will be on the outsides of the roots. And these plants can actually have their roots go a very, very long way. The other type of root you can get in type B is something called a tap root. These are wide and sturdy, a little bit like a trunk under the ground, and they are also very good at holding a plant in place. Plants that have roots like this, for example, carrots and parsnips, will often store sugars in the root as well. That's why they're called root vegetables, because the root is a piece that you eat. Such as your carrots and your parsnips. Don't get caught out by potatoes. Those are not actually roots, those are swellings called tubers. Slightly bizarre, but there we go. Nothing as strange as science. If you have a large plant like a tree, it will have a combination. It will have a tap root that goes a long way down, and it will also have a lot of thin roots that fan around. Scientists have actually found that if you were to study a tree, the spread of the roots below the ground will be the same distance as the spread of the roots above the ground. So if you were to draw a circle under a tree of all the distance that the leaves reach, that would be how far the roots would reach under the ground. And gardeners actually use that to keep control of the size of trees by digging a trench and cutting through the roots to actually stop the tree growing, because actually reducing the amount of minerals, the amount of water that can be taken up by the roots, will actually reduce the growth that a plant is able to make during a year. Now I've got a special case here, something called aerial roots. This is not the washing powder. Look at the spelling, it's slightly different. These are actually roots up in the air, and they will grow from high up in the tree all the way down to the ground. They may reach the ground, they may not. They tend to be found on plants that are in a humid environment, such as a rainforest, where there's lots of moisture held in the air, and the moisture can actually be absorbed through the aerial roots by the process of osmosis. Now, they can't obviously get minerals from the soil by hanging about in the air like this, but they can actually significantly increase the amount of water that they take up. An example here is a banyan tree in Hawaii. You actually get banyan trees in quite a lot of places around the world. They're very strange, quite impressive to see. I'm lucky to have seen one. Almost similar are something called tendrils. If you've seen ivy, ivy will grow up trees, it'll grow up walls, it'll grow on almost anything that doesn't move. And tendrils are they're not roots because they don't go below the ground, but they do have root-like projections which allow them to hold on, a little bit like fingers coming out from them. And they will actually allow a plant to grow up a tree trunk or a wall. And by doing this, it allows them to reach higher than they could do on their own, because their tendrils are very thin. They're not as sturdy as the trunk of a tree, so they're not going to support it trying to climb that high on its own. But what they will do is let it grab on, and that will allow them to go higher up a bigger plant to actually obtain more light. We're getting up from above the ground. And the host plant, the tree, can usually survive, but if it gets a very, very big, old, strong plant of ivy on it, it can suffer by it. So you do need to watch out for it if it's in your garden. So we've thought about how plants can get light by growing earlier in the year, or by having tendrils that allow them to reach higher than they would do otherwise. We've thought about how they get water by having different designs of roots, possibly even aerial roots. Carbon dioxide is not a problem because it is always in the atmosphere at any level. But the other thing they need is space. And space is particularly a problem for a plant when it wants to make offspring, because if you have a plant and the seeds just drop immediately next to it, then the children are going to be competing with the parent for resources. They'll all be growing in the same area, wanting the same water, wanting the same minerals, wanting the same light. That's obviously not a good idea. So mature plants, when they reproduce, need to find a way of getting their seeds to spread further afield. And here we've got the classic one of a dandelion. We all know if you blow the head of a dandelion, it's called the dandelion clock by some people, then the seeds work like little parachutes and they will actually travel a long way, which actually means that the young are not competing with their parents. It also makes the plant very successful in spreading itself around over a larger area. Other plants that have a dispersal mechanism that works on the wind would include sycamores, which are sometimes called helicopter seeds by children. Another way of doing it, slightly more grim, is if an animal eats the seed and then poops out the seed, that seed will have been spread by the distance that the animal has moved between eating the fruit and excreting, correct word, rather than pooping out, but now we know both the words, the seed somewhere different. So seed dispersal can actually prevent competition for space. Now here comes our big question. If you've been paying attention, you've got quite a lot of clues as you go along. Dandelion is a very successful weed. We know this. You find it on school fields, you find it in your gardens, you can find it in paving stones, you can find it anywhere. Now there's some reasons that it is adapted, it is specialised to make it a really good competitor. So why is it such a successful weed? All a weed is a plant in the wrong place, but it is very, very hard as a gardener or groundsman to get rid of this particular weed. So have a think about why it is so successful. You have got 5 words I want you to use in your answer: compete, light, space, mineral ions, water. I want you to think about what you're going to do before you write. Make a little mini plan. It only needs to be bullet points, not whole sentences. Now, your objectives review at the end. Do you now know the equation for photosynthesis? Do you know what resources plants will compete for? Can you explain how plants compete for these resources? You have got a longer question to practice. You don't have to send me your first go. You can have a couple of goes, making sure you get the best you can. You need to email it to me by the 28th of April. Now, to finish, we've got a really strange but true video clip. If you watch this in a video, you will need to copy and paste the link to your browser. It's actually featuring our favourite scientist, David Attenborough, and the strangler fig. There's a bit of a clue in the name, but as I say, it's a really strange but true plant that competes very, very unusually and very successfully. Tell me what you think about it when you send me your email. Take care, stay safe. Hope to see you soon, Year 10.